Cancer loves acid. Cancer also loves no oxygen. So knowing those things, it makes a lot of sense to alkalize the tissues.
Over 10 million deaths every year are because of cancer. Actually, cancer is one of the leading causes of death worldwide. So what can we do to fight it? And how can we prevent it in the first place? According to Barbara O'Neill, a renowned health educator and naturopath, there is a solution to beating cancer: foods. There are specific foods you need to include in your diet to protect your body against cancer. Let's dive into the foods Barbara O'Neill recommends to keep cancer at bay.
So these are the 3 common denominators I find. And so when people come to us wanting help to conquer cancer, you see what we do? We suggest a diet that's highly alkalizing. We suggest ways to oxygenate the body. In fact, some health retreats have hyperbaric chambers. Have you heard of those? We have one, and it puts oxygen in under pressure. And we also greatly eliminate the glucose, the sugars going into the body. What foods have an acid effect and what foods have an alkaline effect? And this will enable you to ensure that you're having a more alkaline diet. So we're going to have a look at alkaline foods and we're going to look at acid foods. And you might be surprised to see that the first alkaline food I'm putting up here is the humble lemon. And you might say, no, the lemon's acid. It is. And it's acid where it should be. There's only one part in the body that should be acid. You know where that is? Stomach. It must be acid. If someone says, I've got a very acid stomach, I say, praise God. Because if you don't have an acid stomach, you can't break your proteins down. No, the lemon is acid where it should be. That's why you'll find that most of our salad dressings have lemon in them. But when it is broken down in the gut and the minerals are dispersed and absorbed into the blood and thus to the tissues, it has an alkaline effect because the lemon is high in the alkaline minerals, which is sodium and potassium, calcium, magnesium and iron. These are the alkaline minerals, and the lemon is high in the alkaline minerals. Don't you love the lemon? Dark green leafy vegetables are also alkaline forming. Dark green leafy vegetables we should be eating every day. That's your kale, that's your parsley, that's your, what you call them, collard greens. Do you know, I've never seen collard greens in Australia. You can tell I'm in Alabama. They're a popular food here, but we do have spinach and silver beet, kale. We should be eating something from the dark green family of vegetables every single day. And if you don't, you really should have a dose of green barley or super greens. Also vegetables. Vegetables have an alkaline effect. But there is a question mark with vegetables. I'm putting a question mark here because for some people these have an alkaline effect and sometimes an acid effect. There's the tomato and bell pepper, or in Australia we call that capsicum. Also eggplant, and some countries call this aubergine. And last is the potato. Now this is not the sweet potato. The sweet potato is actually not a potato. The sweet potato is a yam. I'm referring to the English potato or the Irish potato. This is the nightshade group of vegetables, and for some people they have an acid effect, and for some people they have an alkaline effect. So the choice is yours, the question mark's there. If you love this food, if you have no reaction and no arthritis, enjoy. When you cook the tomato with an oil, and I think you'll agree with me, olive oil and tomatoes go very nice. They almost hand in hand together. And you look at Lebanese food, Italian food, there's a lot of tomato and olive oil cooking. When it's cooked with an oil, it releases a plant chemical called lycopene. Lycopene is from the fat-soluble family, and that's another reason why we should be eating a little oil with our meals, because it helps release the fat-soluble vitamins. Lycopene is a potent antioxidant, and it has the ability to reduce the inflammation of the prostate gland, so that's good news, isn't it? So every man over the age of 40 should be having a cooked tomato and olive oil dish maybe 3 or 4 times a week. That's not hard. Lovely base for your chickpeas, your tomatoes, it is tomatoes. For your, in fact, isn't that Mexican? Your kidney beans to have with your tacos, or your tacos, I think you call them. Mm-hmm. Lima beans and lentils and soy are the 3 alkaline forming legumes. For your grains, the millet is alkaline. We had millet this morning. It's a delicious grain, isn't it? I'm sure you can understand when I said it needs to be dressed. It's basically a bland grain, but it's very nice with the stewed apple and the pear cream and the sprinkles on top. Or it's also very nice if you have it with savoury, your lentils. Quinoa. I think we'll be having quinoa at another breakfast time. These are alkaline grains, but they're also gluten-free grains, so that's made them very popular. Amaranth. Amaranth is a grain that's not very well known. I think the Aztecs, traditionally they've eaten the quinoa and the amaranth. It's a very tiny grain, and when you cook it, it goes like a lump of glue. But what I often do when my grandsons are with us, because they like a porridge, I'll put a little amaranth with the millet, or I'll put a little amaranth with the quinoa, or if they have oats, I'll put a little amaranth with the oats. So that's quite nice. Spelt. Spelt and kamut are wild hybrids of the original wheat. So let me give you the wheat story. The original wheat that God made is called Enkenhorn, or some call it just Enkhorn. And that original wheat had a very fragile protein or gluten structure. It is not sure when, but they estimate a couple of 1,000 years ago, Enkenhorn did a wild hybrid with a field grass and came up with the Emma strain of wheat. Its structure, its protein or gluten structure is not as fragile, but it's still fairly fragile. And in the 1950s, it was the Emma strain of wheat that was put through intensive crossbreeding, and it came up with the hybridized wheat that we know today. That hybridization of the wheat created an incredibly complex gluten or protein structure. Yesterday we looked at the starch that was changed, but today we're looking at how the hybridization process changed the gluten or the protein structure, and it's almost only a cast iron gut that can break down that very complex protein or gluten structure. That explains why so many people are gluten intolerant today. You look at the timeline. So it was the 1950s that the wheat was hybridized. It was the 1970s that it went worldwide. So by the 1990s, every pasta, every pizza, every biscuit, cake, cookie, donut, cereal, bread, it's all made out of the hybridized wheat. You see, the farmers love it, and I don't blame them for loving it because they get 6 times more grain per acre. Who wouldn't like that? They've got to pay their bills. But as I mentioned yesterday, it was zoomed through to help with the starvation crisis in the world, and safety studies were never done. This explains the gluten intolerance that we see today. The 2 most common symptoms of a gluten intolerance is brain fog and bloating. I meet so many people that have brain fog and bloating, and they almost think it's normal, or it can be blamed on age. Poor old age gets blamed for so many things. Isn't that true? Now this Emma wheat, it also did a wild hybrid to come up with a field grass and came up with the spelt. So the spelt, it has retained the fairly fragile structure, and if that spelt meal is made into a sourdough bread, the culturing process in the sourdough bread breaks down that protein or gluten structure even more so that it now has the original structure of the Enkenhorn. If someone is celiac, they cannot have even the spelt. But if someone's gluten intolerant or gluten sensitive, they can usually handle the spelt, especially if it's made into a sourdough bread. So this explains what happened to the wheat. And if you'd like to pursue that a little bit more, you can get the book Wheat Belly. There's another book called Life Without Bread. Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, she also talks about the effect of the wheat on the gut and thus the brain. So there are a few books that talk about it. So coming back to our alkaline forming foods, the two nuts are your almond and Brazil. And all your seeds have an alkaline effect. So what has an acid effect? Before we go there, there's one other, is fruit. Now I've got a question mark with fruit too. Why have I got a question mark? If someone has a yeast presence in their body and they're eating a lot of fruit, the sugar in the fruit will feed the yeast. And as the yeast feeds on the sugars in the fruit, it gives off acetic acid. It gives off lactic acid. It gives off uric acid. So it basically is feathering its nest. So when a person has a yeast presence and they're eating a lot of fruit, can you see that they are feeding the problem? And they're creating the environment of 5.5 where yeast loves to live. And alcohol is also given off. Alcohol breaks down in the body to acetaldehyde. And acetaldehyde is a neurotoxin. We don't want a neurotoxin. A neurotoxin is a brain killer. There are 5 places you can be exposed to acetaldehyde. Yes, if someone consumes alcohol. Yes, if someone has a yeast problem and they're having a lot of fruit, it will break down to this. Cigarette smoke, car fumes give off acetaldehyde. And the last one is vinegar. We don't use vinegar here, we use lemon. Lemon is far superior. Let's have a look at acid-forming foods now.
Barbara O'Neill reminds us that what we eat every day can either fuel disease or fight it. By choosing alkaline foods, we take an active step toward a healthier, cancer-free life. And speaking of living a cancer-free life, we have another video that dives even deeper into this topic. You'll discover even more powerful foods to protect your health. Watch it here. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and share it with others.